Okay, let's start. Okay, so far we have seen the basics of programming. In this class, we will see uh, the basics of tabular data, right? Uh, so here I already have the data. Let's say this is our students data set. Okay, and whenever I say that this is a student data set, what does it mean? It basically means that every row would correspond to one student, right? And every column would correspond to an attribute of that student, right? So, so a basic tabular data. So this is generally called tabular data, right? Generally, it's in two dimensions. Obviously, you can also have tabular data in one dimension. You either have one row or one column, then that would be a tabular data, right? But this is the very common, and I'm sure you must have come across this type of data, right? These are commonly called as tabular data sets. Now, this is the students data. So like I said, each row corresponds to one student, right? So if you see the first row is, so okay, let me give the, okay, and each column corresponds to students attributes. Okay, now what does this mean? Okay, so let's take the first row, this one, right? Yeah, now this is one student's data. Okay, so what are the columns I have? I have ID. ID is similar to your this is a student ID, right? Let's say something similar to roll numbers that we had in our schools. Then we have the name of the student, which is Ajay. So Ajay's roll number is 1, and the subject that he has enrolled, right, is maths. And let's say there was an examination conducted out of 100, and these are the marks that Ajay obtained in maths, 72.5, and the grade corresponding to that mark. So basic, you can take a grading system. Let's say if it's more than 75, given A, 50 to 75, let's say the grade given is B, and less than 50, the grade given is C, right? So in this case, since the marks is 72.5, the grade given is B, right, according to this grading system. Now, as I was saying, each row would correspond to one student's information, right? Similarly, second row represents the student's information for Rohit. Third row represents for Priya. Fourth row for Divya, right? Similarly, so each row is basically corresponds to whatever data you have. And what does each column represent? Each column represents an attribute of a student, right? So name is an attribute of a student, right? So student's name, student subject, student's marks, student's grade. You can have more, right? Like let's say student's gender, so so on and so forth. Okay, so what are the common types of data types that we come across here? So let's take this ID, roll number, right? So these are numbers, right? 1 2 3 4 5 6. So this is a numeric data type, right? ID is a numeric data type, and specifically it's an integer, right? Why? Because we can't have floating values in these, right? We can't have a roll number of, let's say, 2.5 or 2.6, right? Okay, so roll numbers can only take integer values, so that's what I'm writing here. Now what is name? Name can be anything, right? Anything expressed in terms of characters, right? So this is a character. It's called character string. So generally what happens in most programming language, uh, one character represents, like let's say A is a character or W is a character, right? C is a character. These are called characters, but when you represent a combination of them, like AWC, these are called strings. So in this case, we'll just use the notation character string. Okay. So name is a character string data type, right? Or you can just call it string data type or character data type. Okay. We don't have to be very specific. If you're learning any official programming language, there that specificity comes, but in our case, we can just restrict it this way. Next comes the subject. Okay. So the subjects, there are only, let's say, 3 subjects that can be enrolled, which is maths, English, and science in this case, right? Now, one thing is that, so this is, sorry. Okay, my bad. Okay, so this is called a categorical variable, right? Because what does each, okay, so firstly, why not characters? You might say that these are characters as well, right? But there's a subtle difference between them. So characters, so here names, right? Let's say there's a 7th name which needs to be input into this data set. The name can be anything, right? I don't know, but the subject would take on only 3 specific values, right? Either maths or English or science. Because I'm saying that, let's say for a course, you can only enroll in any of these 3 courses, right? So this is the difference between categorical and character strings, that character strings can take on any value and categorical can take only some values in a list of values, right? Of course, each of them individually is also a string, right? And similarly, let's say you had only these couple of students and no one else, even these can be represented as categorical values, but I'm sure you get the difference, right? Okay, next comes marks. So again, this is also numeric, but what's the difference here? It's a float, right? Because this was integer, because it can't take decimal values, but here it can. So that's the difference between marks and roll number or roll ID, right? Similarly, grade. Grade is again categorical because there can only be 3 grades, right? A, B, C, and also you can call it character, but generally we say it's categorical because we know that it can't take any other value apart from these 3. Okay, now what's the difference between subject and grade? If you see, there's one difference. This categorical is called unordered categorical variable, and this categorical is called ordered categorical variable. So what's the difference? Why am I saying that this is unordered and this is ordered? See, because there's an ordering in these values, right? I know that grade A is, let's say, considered better than grade B, considered better than grade C. But when it comes to maths, English, science, there's no such ordering that I can give, right? So grade here becomes categorical variable, right? So there is an ordering. So it becomes an ordered categorical variable, right? And similarly, even marks is ordered, right? So there's a number. Roll numbers are ordered, right? But this is not ordered. Similarly, subject is not ordered. But grade, it's not numeric, it's categorical, but it's ordered. That's the difference between ordered categorical and unordered categorical. Okay. So let's go to R and implement some of these data types. Okay. So roll ID first. So okay, whenever you have to implement certain data types, you can just put as dot that particular, right? So in the console, if when you press, let's say, as dot, you will see what are the different data types allowed. So integer. So you can just get it this way, right? So I am assigning role ID to 2, and so when I press class of a variable, so I'm assigning the variable role ID to the integer 2, and class, this returns me what type of a, what's the data type of that. Actually, class is slightly different in object-oriented programming. So there's something called as class, but you don't need to worry about that. So generally, we say that role ID is of class integer type, right? Then role ID becomes an object instance of the class integer that way. But you can generally use class to get the data type. So class is integer here, right? Okay, next I'm assigning a variable name to my name, and when I press class, you'll see it's a character, right? Similarly, okay, this is the difference between character and categorical. So you can use as.factor to represent that it's a categorical which only takes certain values, right? So you'll see that it's of factor data type, whereas this was of character, right? Sorry. No, sorry, this was character, and now you can see that subject is factor. Okay. Sorry. Okay. What's the difference between subject and grade? We discussed. So grade is ordered, so it's called ordinal categorical, and this was non-ordinal, right? So if you see class, you can see that it's factor, but it's ordered, right? Whereas this was unordered subject. You don't need to worry about how I have represented this. We can discuss this when we discuss about lists and vectors in a future video. Okay. But if you see here, my subject, sorry, my grade. So it's clearly mentioned ordered factor with 3 levels, A less than B less than C, which means A has a precedence of rank 1, B has the next precedence, rank 2, and C has 3, right? So that's the difference. But whereas in subject, you have just 1 level. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can have multiple levels, but they'll be unordered. So, okay, let's just see this. I'll just do it here. Let's say English, Maths, Science. So, yeah, factor. So this is also having 3 levels. English, Maths, and 1, 2, 3, but there's no precedence, right? Because it's unordered. Okay. Then we have marks we discussed. Again, it's numeric and float, right? So generally you can use as.numeric for that. Okay, and a couple of things to keep in mind. Obviously, like you can convert a float to integer, obviously, right? So you can just remove the decimal and consider the integer part of it, but you can't do it the other way, right? I mean, this is basic common sense that you can't convert an integer to a float. Obviously you can, in the sense that this would become 23.0, right? That way. Okay. And similarly, so my name is a character, so you can't add character to number. Obviously that would return an error, right? So I hope this is clear.